The ocean. For us, it's a playground. A place of vacation, relaxation, and beauty. We have mastered it, mapped it, and turned it into our own personal aquarium. We fear a fleeting shadow, a rare shark attack, but in our hearts, we believe the sea belongs to us. Our ancestors knew the truth. They knew that for millions of years, the ocean was not ours. It belonged to a king. A predator so vast, so powerful, it beggars belief. We call it Megalodon. But they would have called it a god, a demon, or simply death. When our expanding world first collided with its ancient kingdom, it wasn't a contest. It was a slaughter. This is what happened when humanity, for the first time, came face to face with the greatest monster that ever lived. Chapter 1. The Lure of the Coast. Humanity's first steps into the blue. Before we can understand the collision, we have to understand the journey. For millions of years, the story of humanity was written in dust and dirt. Our world was the savannah. A brutal, open arena ruled by a simple, vicious cycle. The dry season and the wet season. We were creatures of the land, our lives dictated by the rhythm of rain. But the world was changing. The climate was shifting, becoming cooler and drier. The wet seasons were becoming shorter, the dry seasons longer and more savage. The world our ancestors knew was dying. Imagine the desperation. The familiar waterholes they relied on are nothing but cracked mud. The herds of grazers they once followed have moved on, chasing rain that never comes. The plants and roots they could eat are withered and scarce. Every day is a gamble against starvation, and the odds are getting worse. The old ways, the old territories are failing. To stay is to die. And so, they do the one thing that has always defined us. They walk. They are driven by a force more powerful than any predator: hunger. They move not with a plan, but with a desperate animal instinct, following a scent on the wind they don't even recognize, a hint of moisture, a strange coolness. They are walking away from the only world they have ever known, into a completely alien landscape. This isn't a heroic migration. It's a retreat. A ragged, starving band of refugees, being pushed to the very edge of the map by a planet that no longer seems to have a place for them. They are leaving the heartland of their evolution, completely unaware that they are walking towards a new world, a new source of life, and a new kind of monster that will forever burn itself into their deepest fears. They are walking towards the sea. What must that have been like? To have lived your entire life in a world of brown and green, and then to suddenly be confronted with a world of impossible, endless blue. To have known water only as a shrinking pool in the dirt, and then to see a body of it so vast it touches the sky. It would have been terrifying. It would have been magical. It would have felt like arriving on another planet. But their fear would have quickly been replaced by a more powerful emotion: disbelief. Because this new world wasn't just a spectacle, it was a buffet. The savannah was a world of scarcity, where every calorie had to be fought for. The coast was a world of ludicrous, almost obscene, abundance. As the tide pulls back, it reveals a feast laid out on a platter of wet sand. The rocks are covered in mussels and oysters, packed with protein, just waiting to be cracked open with the same stones they used to crack nuts. In the tide pools, small fish and crabs are trapped, easy for the taking. The carcasses of sea turtles and large fish are washed up on the beach, free meals delivered by the waves. Seals and sea lions, fat and slow on land, lounge on the rocks, a source of rich, oily blubber that would be an unimaginable prize. For a clan on the brink of starvation, this was paradise. It was salvation. They had stumbled out of a desert and into the land of plenty. This was a turning point in human evolution. This new, reliable source of nutrient-dense food, especially the omega-3 fatty acids from seafood, would provide the critical fuel for our brains to continue their explosive growth. We were drawn to the coast, and it was making us smarter. But we were trespassing. We were like children, gleefully playing and feasting in the front yard of a killer's kingdom, completely oblivious to the ancient king watching us from the window. This new world operated by a different set of rules. On the savannah, the threats were known. The lion, the hyena, they could be seen, heard, and smelled. Danger had a familiar face. But here? The greatest danger was silent, invisible, and lived in a world they could not enter. They were land creatures, standing at the absolute edge of their domain, peering into an alien dimension. As they grew bolder, wading deeper to pry shellfish from rocks or to poke at floating objects, they would have seen the signs. Signs they wouldn't have understood. A huge sea lion, basking on a rock one moment, is suddenly gone the next, with no sound, no struggle, just a rapidly expanding cloud of red in the water. They might see the colossal carcass of an early whale floating offshore, but it has been savaged by a bite so immense, so powerful, that no land predator could possibly have made it. The bite mark itself is the size of a small cave. They are being watched. Every splash they make, every movement at the water's edge, sends vibrations into this new world. And the ruler of this world is a creature of vibration. It is a sensory predator tuned to the struggles of animals in the water. And these strange, new two-legged creatures are clumsy. They are noisy. They are spending more and more time at the edge of the deepest, darkest abyss on the planet. They feel safe. They are at the top of the food chain on the shore. But they have unwittingly entered a new food chain. And on this one they are not at the top. They are not even in the middle. They are small, insignificant, and tempting new morsels, splashing around at the edge of the dinner plate of the ocean's forever king. The collision is now inevitable. Chapter 2. The Tyrant King, a scientific autopsy of the Megalodon. Before we can understand the encounter, we must first understand the creature. We need to strip away the myth, the fiction, and the B-movie hype, and conduct a proper scientific autopsy of the most powerful predator in the history of life on Earth. We call it Autopsy Megalodon. And to begin, you must take the most feared animal in our modern oceans, the great white shark, and you must see it for what it truly is in this context. A pale, insignificant ghost. Your modern great white might reach a maximum length of 20 feet. Megalodon? Conservative estimates, based on the size of its fossilized vertebrae and teeth, place its average length at 50 to 60 feet. The largest individuals may have approached 70 feet. This is not a shark. This is a locomotive with teeth. It was longer than a city bus and as heavy as a railroad car. But its true horror was not just in its length. It was in its bulk. The Megalodon was built on a different scale of power. While a great white is a sleek torpedo, Megalodon was a battering ram of solid muscle, weighing upwards of 60 tons. It was thicker, wider, and immensely more powerful. It was, in essence, a great white scaled up to the size of a whale, possessing a brutality that no creature alive today can match. And then there are the teeth. They are the only part of the shark that fossilized with any regularity, and they are the stuff of nightmares. A great white's tooth is a formidable, serrated scalpel. A Megalodon's tooth was a 7-inch axe blade. They were thicker, broader, and more robust, designed not just for slicing flesh but for shattering bone. When you hold a Megalodon tooth in your hand, you are not holding the tooth of a shark. You are holding a weapon of geological scale violence, a testament to a predator that operated on a level of power the modern world has never, ever seen. A predator of this size cannot afford to be a dumb brute. Energy is everything. A failed hunt is a catastrophic waste of calories. Therefore, Megalodon was not just powerful, it was a brutally intelligent and strategic killer. Its entire design was honed for one purpose: to hunt and kill the only prey large enough to sustain it, the giant whales of the ancient seas. Its primary weapon was ambush. It would patrol the dark, crushing depths, its dark gray back making it nearly invisible from above. Using its enormous eyes and its highly developed sensory organs that could detect the faint electrical pulses of muscle contractions, it would stalk its prey from below. Then it would attack, not in a chaotic frenzy, but with a horrifying, calculated precision. It would launch itself upwards like a nuclear submarine breaking the surface, a 60-ton missile of muscle and teeth, accelerating towards the unsuspecting whale above. But it often wouldn't go for an instant kill. Its strategy was one of immobilization. Fossilized whale bones from this period tell a chillingly consistent story. Megalodon would use its incredible bite force, estimated to be up to 40,000 pounds per square inch, a force that could crush a modern car as easily as you would crush a soda can, to inflict a single catastrophic, disabling blow. It would often target the flippers or the powerful tail flukes of the whale. With a single bite, it could shear straight through the bone, effectively crippling the whale and rendering it helpless. Other times it would ram its prey from the side, aiming for the rib cage, its teeth strong enough to puncture the chest cavity and collapse the whale's lungs. The attack was not a bite, it was an act of tactical demolition. The king did not need to engage in a messy struggle. It would cripple its victim, retreat to a safe distance, and simply wait for the 30-ton animal to bleed out and drown. It was a killer of terrifying efficiency and patience. Megalodon was more than just an apex predator. It was a shaping force of nature. Its existence created what scientists call a top-down trophic cascade. This means the king at the top of the food chain dictated the rules for everyone else, all the way down to the smallest fish. Its presence created a permanent, global landscape of fear in the oceans. The very evolution of modern whales was likely shaped by the terror of the Megalodon. To survive, whales had to adapt. Some evolved to be faster and more agile, to have a chance of outmaneuvering the great shark. Others, like the ancestors of the sperm whale, evolved to become giants themselves, their sheer size being their only potential defense. The move into the cold, polar waters where the heat-loving Megalodon could not follow was likely a direct evolutionary response to its relentless predation. For millions of years, Megalodon was the undisputed tyrant of the sea. It had no rivals. It had no challengers. The oceans of the world were its personal kingdom, its private hunting ground. It could go where it wanted, kill what it wanted, and its reign was absolute. Every creature in the sea lived with the subconscious, genetic understanding that the king was always out there, patrolling the dark, its black eyes scanning for its next meal. And it is into this kingdom of absolute terror, ruled by the most powerful predator the planet has ever produced, that our small, clever, and completely outmatched ancestors decided to go for a swim. They were leaving a world of lions and bears and stepping into a world ruled by a literal sea god of unimaginable power. They had no idea what was coming. Chapter 3. When Worlds Collide, Reconstructing the First Encounter. For a hungry clan of early humans, this was the ultimate jackpot. A beached whale represented more calories, more fat, and more protein than they could possibly get in a year of hunting on the savannah. It was a gift from the strange blue god of this new world. It meant security. It meant their children would eat well for weeks. It meant they could rest from the constant, grinding search for food. Their discovery would have been met with a kind of delirious joy. But their celebration was dangerously premature. A dead or dying whale is not just a feast for land creatures. It is a dinner bell for the entire ocean. The scent of its blood and decaying flesh travels for miles on the currents, sending out an irresistible invitation. And the first to RSVP, the one who considers all whales his personal property, is the king. As the humans work, giddy with their good fortune, they are oblivious. They are focused on the task at hand, their world narrowed to the meat and the blubber. They don't see the change in the water just offshore. They don't see the way the smaller sharks, which may have been nibbling at the floating parts of the carcass, suddenly vanish. They don't notice the deep, unnatural stillness that has fallen over the surf. And then, it happens. The first sign would be a pressure wave, a sudden, powerful surge of water that pushes up the beach, far stronger than any normal wave. It would knock them off their feet, confusing them. And as they scramble up, soaked and disoriented, they would see it. A shadow detaching itself from the deep. A dorsal fin the size of a man slicing through the water, moving with impossible speed. And then the head. A cone of battleship gray, wider than any three of them standing shoulder to shoulder, rising from the water, its black, lifeless eyes the size of dinner plates. The joy of the feast would turn instantly to a kind of primal, mind-shattering terror for which they had no name. The attack would defy all known laws of their world. This was not the attack of a lion, a tearing and a worrying at the flesh. This was an act of planetary violence. The Megalodon wouldn't nibble. It would collide with the whale carcass with the force of a runaway freight train. Its lower jaw would depress, its mouth expanding into a gaping cavern large enough to swallow a small rhinoceros whole. The sound would be the most terrifying part. A deep, percussive impact of the shark's snout hitting the body, immediately followed by the sound of its massive, serrated teeth shearing through skin, blubber, and solid bone with equal, effortless ease. It would carve out a chunk of flesh weighing over 1,000 pounds in a single, casual bite. The entire whale carcass, weighing many tons, would be thrown and twisted in the water as if it were a bath toy. For the humans on the shore, this would be an encounter with a living god. Their brains would be unable to process the scale of what they were seeing. The sheer power, the sheer size, it wouldn't compute. It would break their understanding of what was possible in the natural world. This was not an animal. This was a force of nature, like an earthquake or a tidal wave, given teeth and a malevolent intelligence. The terror would be absolute. They would scramble backwards, away from the water's edge, their flint tools forgotten, their minds wiped clean of everything but a single overriding command: flee. They would not be thinking about fighting. The concept would be ludicrous. You cannot fight a landslide. You cannot punch a tidal wave. And you cannot fight this. You can only run and pray that the monster's attention stays fixed on the whale, and not on the small, screaming snacks that have just fled the dinner table. An encounter like that doesn't just create a memory. It creates a scar. It rewrites the rules of the world. The ocean, which once seemed a place of boundless, easy bounty, is now a place of profound and unpredictable terror. It is a border they now know they should not cross. But as human intelligence and curiosity grew, so did our ambition. We would not stay confined to the beach forever. This is the next likely scenario for an encounter, and in many ways, it is even more horrifying. A small group, emboldened by time or driven by need, constructs a primitive watercraft. It's not a boat. just barely a raft. It allows them to fish in the deeper water of a bay or an estuary, places that are often used as nurseries for young whales and therefore are prime hunting grounds for a hungry megalodon. They are in the monster's element now. The flimsy raft offers no protection. It is merely a small, floating charcuterie board. They would be completely unaware of the leviathan rising from the murky depths beneath them. The first sign would be a bump from below. A gentle, exploratory nudge so powerful it lifts the entire raft and knocks them off balance. Confusion would turn to panic as they look down and see a shape, a shadow bigger than the raft itself, circling them. This is a shark's classic test bite, an investigatory probe. But an investigation from a 60-ton animal is an act of destruction. The megalodon would rise up and take the raft in its mouth, not with the violence of its whale attack, but with a slow, crushing pressure. The sound of wet wood splintering and the screams of the men would be the last sounds they ever made. To the shark, this was not a hunt. It was a moment of idle curiosity. It was a sample. And for the handful of humans who may have survived, clinging to a broken log, they would be left with a story so terrifying, it would become the foundation for every sea monster legend our species would ever tell. Chapter 4. The Birth of the Sea Monster, a Legacy of Fear. What happens after the attack? What happens after the mind-breaking terror of the encounter? The survivors, if there are any, carry something back with them that is more profound than a simple memory. They carry a story. And in a world without writing, stories are everything. They are survival guides, history books, and religious texts, all rolled into one. And the story of the great fish, the living mountain in the water, would be the most important story they would ever tell. They didn't have the language of science. They couldn't call it Otodus megalodon. They would have to invent a new kind of language, a language of myth. They would describe it as a god, a demon, the angry spirit of the ocean itself. They would use the only words they had, words meant for the biggest things in their world, mountains, caves, the sky, and try to apply them to a living, breathing creature. A mouth as big as a cave. A back as wide as a hillside. A shadow that blocked out the sun. This story would be told around every campfire, passed down from one generation to the next. And it would serve a vital, practical purpose. It would be a warning. It would teach the children the new rules of the world. Do not go into the deep water. Do not play on the floating logs. When the tide brings a great feast, be wary, for the owner of the feast may come to claim it. The story was a tool of behavioral modification. It was instilling a necessary and life-saving fear into the tribe. But it was doing something more. It was creating the first monster. Not a land monster like a lion or a bear, which was a known quantity, a physical problem to be solved. This was a supernatural monster. A creature that came from another dimension, a world of darkness and water where humans did not belong. It was a monster that could not be fought, could not be killed, and could only be avoided. The megalodon wasn't just a predator of the body, it became a predator of the human imagination. This primal story, born from a real encounter with a real creature, did not die out. It became embedded in our collective unconscious. It is the archetype, the blueprint for every sea monster myth that has ever haunted humanity. The details change, the names are different, but the core of the story remains the same. A vast, ancient, and malevolent intelligence that lurks in the unfathomable depths, a creature that represents the terror of the unknown. Think of the Leviathan of the Old Testament, a sea serpent of such immense size it could encircle the world. Think of the Kraken, the giant cephalopod of Norse legend that could pull entire ships down to the icy depths. Think of the sea serpents drawn by medieval cartographers in the blank spaces of their maps, a clear warning, here be monsters. Where did this universal, cross-cultural fear come from? Why are our nightmares of the deep so eerily similar? It's because, for once, the monster was real. The story of Megalodon is the plausible origin story for them all. It was a creature that possessed all the key ingredients. It was colossal, it was terrifyingly powerful, it was intelligent, and most importantly, it lived in a realm that was utterly alien and inaccessible to us. It was the living embodiment of the abyss. Our fear of deep water is not irrational. It is a deeply ingrained, evolutionary hangover. It is a heritable phobia, passed down in the cautionary tales of our ancestors and hardwired into our brains by the very real threat of a very real monster. When you stand at the edge of the ocean and feel a shiver of dread as you look out into the deep, dark water, you are not being silly. You are feeling the ancient echo of your ancestors' terror. You are remembering the Megalodon. The legacy of the Megalodon was not just in our myths. It was in our actions. It acted as a powerful brake on human expansion and technological development for hundreds of thousands of years. It effectively created a wall, a boundary that our species was too terrified to cross. The great leap forward of seafaring, the moment we built boats capable of crossing open water to reach new lands, was likely delayed for millennia because of the very real risk of being eaten by a sea monster. The potential reward of crossing that bay or reaching that island was not worth the near certainty of a fatal encounter with the ocean's king. The Megalodon enforced a planetary quarantine, keeping humanity a coastal and terrestrial species. This fear also shaped our diet and our settlement patterns. We would have learned to exploit the resources of the intertidal zone, the area between the high and low tide marks, with extreme caution. We would have become experts at the smash and grab, running in to collect shellfish or scavenge a washed-up animal, and then retreating to a safe distance before the owner of the sea came to investigate. The psychological impact is profound. For all our growing intelligence, for all our mastery of stone tools and fire, the Megalodon was a constant, terrifying reminder that we were not the masters of this planet. It kept us humble, kept us afraid. It reinforced the idea that there were forces in the world far greater than ourselves, ancient powers that commanded respect and, above all, distance. Humanity's conquest of the earth had to go around the oceans, because the oceans had a king, and that king did not tolerate trespassers. Our journey to becoming the dominant species on the planet could not be completed until the Tyrant King was dead. Chapter 5. The Empty Throne, the Fall of the Monster King. No king reigns forever. No empire lasts for eternity. For nearly 20 million years, Megalodon was the undisputed ruler of the Earth's oceans, the most successful and dominant predator of its time. Its power was absolute. But the Tyrant King was not brought down by a rival, not by a bigger predator. It was brought down by an enemy it could not bite, a force it could not fight. It was killed by the planet itself. Its downfall was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts, brought on by the massive global changes of a world plunging deeper into an ice age. The first blow was to its food supply. Megalodon was a specialist. It was a whale hunter. Its massive size and high-energy lifestyle demanded a constant supply of large, fatty prey. It needed the ancient, slow-moving whales like Cetatherium to survive. But as the planet cooled, the whales began to adapt. They evolved into the faster, more agile species we know today, like the ancestors of modern baleen whales. They also began migrating into the newly forming polar regions, the icy waters of the Arctic and Antarctic, in search of krill. This was a disaster for the Megalodon. It was a warm-water shark. Its physiology could not handle the extreme cold of the polar seas. Its primary food source was now moving to places where it could not follow. The all-you-can-eat buffet was closing down. The great whale-hunting grounds of the temperate oceans began to empty, leaving the king to patrol a barren kingdom, starving and searching for prey that was no longer there. At the same time, new competitors emerged. Smaller, more adaptable predators like the ancestor of the great white shark were better suited to hunt the smaller, faster prey that remained, like seals and dolphins. And a new type of killer, the ancestors of the orca, with their pack-hunting strategies and superior intelligence, began to challenge the great shark for the remaining large prey. The king was now old, slow, and starving in a world that was changing faster than it could adapt. The second and perhaps fatal blow was the loss of its territory. As the ice caps grew, they locked up vast quantities of the world's water. Sea levels began to plummet, dropping by hundreds of feet. This had a catastrophic effect on the Megalodon's entire life cycle. Megalodon, like many sharks today, relied on shallow, warm, coastal lagoons and estuaries as safe nursery grounds for its young. Here, the juvenile megalodons, already the size of a modern great white, could grow in relative safety, feeding on smaller prey before they were large enough to venture into the deep ocean. But as the sea levels dropped, these vital nurseries vanished. They literally dried up, turning into coastal plains and forests. The great shark's breeding grounds were systematically destroyed. It was left with nowhere safe to give birth, its pups forced into the open ocean where they would be prey for other sharks or even cannibalized by adult megalodons. The production line of new kings was shut down. The dynasty was collapsing from within. This shrinking world also created choke points. The dropping sea levels closed off ancient seaways, like the one that once separated North and South America. This fragmented the megalodon's global population, isolating groups from each other and preventing them from reaching their traditional hunting and breeding grounds. The king, who once ruled a unified global ocean, now found itself trapped in shrinking, isolated ponds, its empire crumbling into disconnected, failing states. The planet was systematically taking away its food, its home, and its future. And so the king died. Around 3.6 million years ago, The last Megalodon likely starved to death in a cold, empty ocean, the final lonely punctuation mark on an epic reign. Its death was not a single event, but a slow, grinding extinction that it was powerless to stop. The monster was gone, and its death was the single most important geological event for the future of humanity. The fall of the Tyrant King created a power vacuum. The oceans, once a terrifying no-go zone, were now open. The fear that had kept us chained to the coastlines for millennia began to fade with the monster that created it. This was the dawn of a new era. Without the Megalodon to hunt them, whale and seal populations flourished in the temperate waters. For coastal-dwelling humans, this meant an unprecedented explosion of resources. And without the terror of a 60-ton sea monster, the idea of building a boat, of crossing that channel to the island on the horizon, was no longer a suicide mission. It was a possibility. The death of the Megalodon did not just open the seas, it opened the human mind. It allowed us to see the ocean not as a boundary but as a pathway. It was the key that unlocked the final 70% of the planet for us. We could finally complete our conquest. We could finally become the dominant species, not just on the land but across the entire globe. But we did not win the throne through battle. We inherited it. We are only the masters of the sea because the true king, the greatest monster that ever lived, was killed by a changing world, leaving an empty throne for a small, clever primate to timidly climb upon. It's a humbling perspective. We sail these oceans with such confidence, with such a sense of ownership, rarely stopping to think that we're only able to do so because a much greater power died out long ago. We live in the brief, quiet interlude after the fall of a true titan. The story of our encounter with Megalodon is a powerful reminder that for most of our history, we were not in charge. We were just another animal trying to survive in a world of giants. So, what part of this ancient clash fascinates you the most? The sheer power of the shark, the terror of the first encounter, or the fact that its death was the key to our global dominance? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If you enjoy exploring these epic and often terrifying turning points in the human story, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We go deep into the mysteries of our past every week, and you won't want to miss the next chapter. Thanks for joining us on this voyage. And the next time you're at the beach, maybe stay in the shallows. Just in case.